Thales of Miletus. Thales is often called the first Western philosopher for seeking natural causes instead of myth. We portray him as a water inspector because he saw water as the basis of all things. Heraclitus. Heraclitus mattered because he argued that reality is always changing and that conflict helps shape the world. We portray him as a coins for cash clerk because he handles literal change all day, and that's just what we came up with. Pythagoras. Pythagoras helped shape philosophy and math by arguing that numbers and ratios reveal reality's hidden order. We portrayed him as a high school geometry teacher, with glowing triangle eyes. Socrates. Socrates changed philosophy by turning it towards ethics and using questions to test every idea. We portray him as a public school ethics teacher because his legacy was helping ordinary people learn to think for themselves. Plato. Plato shaped Western philosophy through his ideas on justice, knowledge, and ideal forms, and by founding the academy. We portray him as a modern, bumbling college professor because that's really funny. Aristotle. Aristotle shaped logic, ethics, politics, and science so deeply that Western thought followed his frameworks for centuries. We portrayed him as a modern college professor who begins to glow with philosophical significance. Epicurus. Epicurus shaped philosophy by teaching that happiness comes from simple pleasures, friendship, and freedom from fear. We show him as a community college lecturer eating a simple lunch in a garden because it reflects his simple ideals. Zeno. Zeno of Citium founded Stoicism, teaching self-control, reason, and acceptance of fate. We portray him as a port shipping clerk to echo his merchant past and the shipwreck that set him on his philosophical path. Confucius. Confucius shaped Chinese and East Asian philosophy with his teachings on duty, virtue, education, and social harmony. We show him as a government worker because he was a government worker in real life, and it's funny to see him get yelled at. Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu is the legendary sage behind the Tao Te Ching, which shaped Chinese philosophy through teachings on humility, balance, and harmony with the natural way. We portray him as a library archivist because that's what ChatGPT told me to do. Mozu. Mozu was an influential Chinese philosopher who taught universal care, merit over birth, and opposition to aggressive war. We portray him as a mutual aid coordinator because it turns those ideas into everyday community service and practical protection. Sun Tzu. Sun Tzu shaped history with the art of war, showing that victory depends on strategy, timing, and understanding people, not force alone. We portray him as a corporate strategy director because his ideas still guide modern competition and decision-making. Augustine of Hippo. Augustine of Hippo fused classical philosophy with Christian theology, shaping enduring ideas about sin, grace, and the self. We portray him as a modern North African preacher, and then we showed a bunch of hippos storming the room. Boethius. Boethius carried ancient philosophy into the medieval world and explored fate, free will, and divine justice while awaiting death. We portray him as a disgraced government advisor because he was a Roman official imprisoned as his world collapsed. Avicenna. Avicenna was a philosopher-physician whose work shaped medicine, logic, and metaphysics across the Islamic world. We portray him as a modern internist because if you're an internist, you need philosophy to not go insane. Averroes. Averroes helped bring Aristotle back into European thought and argued that reason and faith belong together. We portrayed him as a law and philosophy professor, being visited by an AI slop Aristotle. Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas fused Christian theology with Aristotelian reason, shaping medieval philosophy and Catholic thought for centuries. We portray him as a seminary professor who loves bagels. William of Ockham. William of Ockham shaped philosophy with Occam's razor, the idea that the simplest explanation is usually the best. We portray him as a Catholic college adjunct, and we also put a razor on his desk. Machiavelli. Machiavelli changed history and political philosophy by analyzing power as it really works, not as moral ideals say it should. We portray him as a campaign strategist, probably a Democrat, because Democrats are evil. Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon helped make observation and experiment central to philosophy, shaping modern empiricism. We portray him as a routine research administrator because his legacy lives on in everyday systems that organize evidence. Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes argued that strong government prevents society from sliding into fear and conflict. We portray him as a government bureaucrat who's rubbing papers all over himself. René Descartes. René Descartes helped launch modern philosophy by making doubt and reason the test of knowledge. He famously said, "I think, therefore I am." And he doesn't afraid of anybody. Baruch Spinoza. Spinoza helped shape modern philosophy by arguing that God and nature are one and that reason, not dogma, should shape understanding. We portray him as a lens technician because he really ground lenses. Then we made him look like Bubbles from Trailer Park Boys. John Locke. John Locke shaped modern philosophy and democracy by arguing that knowledge comes from experience and that government must protect natural rights. We cast him as a civics professor whose glasses apparently just materialized onto his face somehow. Leibniz. Leibniz helped develop calculus and argued for a rational, ordered universe, making him a major thinker of modern philosophy. We portrayed him as a data analyst. We also put a Bigfoot in the background to make the scene more interesting. George Berkeley. Berkeley was a philosopher bishop who made idealism famous by arguing that reality exists only as it is perceived. We showed him as a modern chaplain lecturer, but that's not the important thing. The important thing is that he's glowing and floating in the air. David Hume. David Hume reshaped philosophy by arguing that knowledge comes from habit and experience, not reason alone. We showed him as an everyday university professor because a more creative idea just wasn't in the budget. Rousseau. Rousseau shaped modern thought by arguing that society corrupts natural human goodness and that legitimate government must reflect the people's will. We showed him in chains because man was born free, but everywhere he goes, he is in chains. Immanuel Kant. Kant reshaped modern philosophy by arguing that the mind helps structure experience and that morality rests on universal duty. We showed him as a meticulous college professor, and we also threw in some kind of AI slop monster in the background. Hegel. Hegel changed modern philosophy by arguing that history and ideas move through conflict and development, shaping later thinkers like Marx. We showed him sitting at his desk and then like a Napoleonic battlefield just comes out of nowhere and then he's like crying. And Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer argued that human life is driven by endless desire and suffering, influencing thinkers like Nietzsche and Freud. We portrayed him receiving a DoorDash order only to realize that it's cold, symbolizing the suffering we must all deal with in life. John Stuart Mill. John Stuart Mill shaped modern liberal thought by defending individual liberty, utilitarian ethics, and reform. We showed him drinking a big pot of AI slop, kind of like what you are doing by watching this video. Kierkegaard. Soren Kierkegaard helped found existentialism by arguing that truth is lived through personal choice, anxiety, faith, and responsibility. We show him as a straight-up gangsta because he's Danish just like me. Karl Marx. Karl Marx changed modern history and political thought by arguing that capitalism is driven by class conflict and worker exploitation. We first showed him as a homeless man, and then we showed him burning in hell where he belongs. Nietzsche. Nietzsche transformed thought by challenging morality and religion and arguing that people create values shaping existentialism and psychology. We showed him as a college professor dutifully reading books by great thinkers like Platon. Charles Sanders Peirce. Charles Sanders Peirce helped found Pragmatism, arguing that ideas gain meaning through their real-world effects. We show him as a modern survey analyst who just keeps dropping things and falling all over the place. William James. William James helped found modern psychology and made pragmatism central to American philosophy by tying truth to lived experience. We show him as a college professor whose office has burst into flames. Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell helped shape modern analytical philosophy by using logic and precise language to clarify truth, knowledge, and argument. We portray him as a modern college professor whose office has also burst into flames. Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein transformed modern philosophy by arguing that meaning comes from how language is used, not from abstract logic. We showed him as a college professor who's literally beating the crap out of one of his students. Heidegger. Heidegger shaped modern philosophy by probing being, mortality, and authentic human life, influencing existentialism and phenomenology. We showed him having a mental breakdown. This symbolizes what happens when you study philosophy. Sartre. Sartre shaped existentialism by arguing that we are radically free and responsible for what we become. We portray him as an overworked professor who's caught in a windstorm. Simone de Beauvoir. Beauvoir transformed modern philosophy by showing how gender is shaped by society, helping lay the foundation for feminist thought. We showed her as a Trump supporter because, why not? Albert Camus. Camus shaped modern thought by arguing that in an absurd, indifferent world, people still choose dignity and moral courage. We showed him as a chain smoker because that's what he was in real life. Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt explained totalitarianism, power, and the danger of thoughtless obedience in modern mass society. We showed her working in her space station and then getting sucked into the vacuum of space. Karl Popper. Karl Popper changed modern thought by arguing that science advances through falsifiable tests, not final proof. We showed him on a futuristic starship. He produces a laser pistol from below his desk and contemplates killing the captain of the ship, Zarlon. Michael Foucault. Foucault showed how power hides in everyday institutions, records, and surveillance, shaping what societies call truth and normality. We showed him about to eat a huge bagel, because why wouldn't bagels exist in the future? Jacques Derrida. Derrida changed modern philosophy by showing that language never delivers one fixed meaning. We showed him on a futuristic spaceship which is having a terrible accident. Unfortunately, Derrida didn't survive. John Rawls. John Rawls reshaped modern political philosophy by arguing that justice depends on equal rights and fair institutions. We show him in the most boring room of a futuristic spaceship, because they would probably have boring rooms there too. Jürgen Habermas. Habermas made the public sphere central to modern philosophy by arguing that democracy lives or dies by rational dialogue. We show him getting into a huge argument with a robot. Peter Singer. Peter Singer made ethics practical by arguing that suffering matters across borders and species. We showed him working in a futuristic corporate environment, eating a corporate slop bowl. Daniel Dennett. Daniel Dennett reshaped modern philosophy by treating mind and consciousness as products of evolution and cognitive science, not mystery. We show him trying to get work done as a terrible robot accident happens behind him. Slavoj Žižek. Zizek fused Hegel, Marx, and psychoanalysis to expose the contradictions of modern ideology, politics, and culture. We portray him witnessing the terrorist attack which would trigger a galaxy-wide war, the Zarglon War.